are back with another episode of Unfinished Business. And why do I say we? Because we have special guest Andre Joseph, filmmaker extraordinaire, and also a reviewer in his own right online. So, I actually didn't pick this subject to speak about, so I'll let Andre introduce what we will be talking about this week.
All right, this week we're going to be talking about the great American Beverly Hills Cop trilogy starring Eddie Murphy. Trilogy close to my heart, which unfortunately went downhill towards the end, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So why don't you start us off, Mr. Gallashaw?
First off, we're going to be talking about the first film in the trilogy, Beverly Hills Cop, which came out, as I was informed recently, in 1984. And it is directed by Martin Brest and obviously stars Eddie Murphy, but he was actually not the original intended star of this film. That was actually Sylvester Stallone. And I'll throw it to Andre to tell all this interesting tidbit about Sylvester Stallone's involvement in the film.
Well, the way it started out, they were trying to go for a straight drama at first. You know, they basically wanted to be like Dirty Harry, Shampoo, and all these other films in the 1970s. And
Shampoo?
Well, that was one of the inspirations that Don Simpson had mentioned in an interview years ago. So basically, they had intended the movie actually for James Caan or Clint Eastwood or Al Pacino. But by the time the 80s came around, in came Mickey Rourke, who, you know, was a hot star after Body Heat. They thought he had that nice balance of comedy and drama in his acting repertoire. Okay. And by that point, they felt that the premise would work better as a comedy. They couldn't get Rourke, so then Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer mentioned this story about how they saw Eddie Murphy in a parking lot and, you know, mentioned to him, this was after 48 Hours, they mentioned they were making this movie, Beverly Hills Cop. It's like, oh yeah, this is something I'd like to do one day. But then when they went to the studio to pitch the idea to get Eddie in the film, Sylvester Stallone was under a specific contract with Paramount and they offered him a pay-or-play deal to do any movie that they wanted. Therefore, they pitched him Cop and he was interested. But then, of course, once he got in, he rewrote the script and tried to reinvent that character into Dirty Harry with an Uzi.
I know that, like, for instance, the script was patched together from a bunch of different scripts that they had written, but I think also one of the things that helped sell the film is Eddie Murphy's personality and his comedy. Even though it's not specifically a lot of comedy and it's not specifically a lot of action, but it's a nice mix in there, and it's kind of subdued in a way. And I mean, he has great support from Ronnie Cox. Judge Reinhold is serviceable in the film, but who played Taggart?
Oh, John Ashton.
John Ashton, always good, always dependable, not seen enough these days. And I know originally in one of the scripts that, spoiler if you haven't seen the film, Mikey
Tandino.
Yeah, Mikey, who gets killed in the beginning of the film, which is the whole reason he goes to Beverly Hills, was supposed to be his brother. Mm-hmm. And instead, in this film, they make it like he's just an old friend of his. And then also, who was the female? What was the female?
Lisa Ellenbacher?
I'm just blanking out, sorry folks, on characters' names. But I know she was supposed to be a love interest instead of now in the film. She's more just, hey, buddy, or an old friend. My thing with this film, if you watch it now, it's obviously dated. But, I mean, again, it's still funny. You have, like, cameos, well, more supporting roles, but really cameos or early roles of Damon Wayans, Paul Reiser. And this was back, you know, at the beginning of Eddie Murphy's career. And it kind of defined what would be kind of his mark in movies. Because in a lot of films, if you notice, he's always like a fish out of water in whatever. But he's so cool that instead of adapting to them, the whole atmosphere that he's in adapts to him.
I mean, the characters are so memorable. Martin Brest finds a good balance between the comedy and the humor. And, you know, I guess he was kind of taking inspiration from 48 Hours in terms of making the drama as serious as possible, but then offsetting that with the comedy. I mean, you have an opening scene where once Eddie Murphy, you know, runs into James Russo's character and, you know, they buddy up, they go to a bar, they get drunk. He gets killed execution style in a way that, you know, up until that point, you're having fun watching this movie after the truck chase and, you know, the heat is on, all that stuff. But then once you get to that moment, you're like, whoa. I mean, all of a sudden, it took on this very deadly serious tone. But Eddie comes back and tries to draw us back in and lets us have fun with him as he's sending up all these upper class, posh Beverly Hills yuppies in their white suits. And, it just, I think it speaks to that time, and it's still relevant now, to have a blue collar Detroit cop making fun of these class stereotypes. I think that's what makes it still stand out today.
Well, I mean, as you were saying, you have the iconic Pointer Sisters theme song, and also the theme by Harold Faltermeyer. Which, at least if you're of a certain age, as soon as you hear it, it sends instant memories for you. I remember I used to actually have the soundtrack album. That shows you how long ago it was. It was an album. The whole thing, a lot of the scenes in the film, Eddie Murphy kind of just takes over whatever it is and uses racism kind of to his advantage, which I also enjoy.
To a point, yes.
Like when he goes into the warehouse and he is yelling at them, and how could they think he was a thief when he's actually, a security chief, or he's there to check something. And then one of my favorite scenes, which is actually quite poignant, is when he's, I guess, mouthing off to Taggart, and Taggart punches him in the stomach. Mm-hmm. And then the chief reprimands Taggart and asks him if he actually wants to press charges against him. Whereas in a lot of movies we've seen this happen, the captain either just looks the other way or acts like it didn't happen. So I really enjoyed that. Bronson Pinchot as Salge. I'm going to make a bold statement, and this might get me banned from certain Bronson Pinchot boards. This is one of the few times he's actually funny in a film, or ever, because I was not a big fan of Perfect Strangers television show. Obviously, this film was like a mega hit, and it obviously boosted Eddie Murphy's career. And eventually, 3 years later, they made a sequel called Beverly Hills Cop 2, back when they just put a number after a sequel instead of just putting it out as, Beverly Hills Cop till the break of dawn. So in this one, Ronnie Cox's character is actually shot but doesn't die, but obviously they're handling the investigation, but after hearing this, Eddie Murphy's character comes back from Detroit to come to Beverly Hills again to investigate on his own, and things have changed a little bit more. In fact, we get a new director, Tony Scott, the great Tony Scott.
God bless his soul.
This film has bits of comedy, but I find this one more action-oriented. I mean, Brigitte Nielsen is the right-hand villain, and her husband tried to star and dropped out of the original. So I found that kind of aspect interesting. I didn't know it at the time, later in life, obviously. But and I just think this one seems, I like the film, but it seems a little more excessive. Like, whereas maybe it was trying to show the time has changed, but in like 87, we're at Hef's mansion. He's renting this big house with a pool. The guns are bigger. It's no longer like these little, Colts. Now you're dealing with like machine guns and 9mm.
Bazookas.
Exactly. And it's just like, this is kind of, ridiculous. And this is supposed to be a cop tale. You expect this type of thing in an espionage or, terrorist situation.
Cop 2 was the first one that I saw when I was very young. It was on television. I remember it was on CBS. And, I still enjoy the movie to this day for the fond memories of it. It is entertaining. It is a guilty pleasure. And even watching it again recently, I appreciate the change with the relationship between Axel, Rosewood, and Taggart, where in the first movie, Rosewood and Taggart were just chasing Eddie around in Beverly Hills, trying to stop him from going after the bad guys. Now, they become lifelong friends. They go on fishing trips, and you get to hear more about their backstories. Rosewood with the turtles and the plants, and his obsession with guns, and Taggart with the family problems. So I thought that was really nice to know. But that being said, yeah, I think because it was that era of Rambo and, of course, Cobra, they tried to step up the action to levels of MTV absurdity for the late 1980s. And the addition of Brigitte Nielsen, I think, only added to the comic factor of it, because, I mean, because it just, you had, realistic mobster-like villains in the first one. Now you got this cartoonish White Grace Jones for one bad guy. You have the great Jurgen, I don't know how you say his last name.
Prunchow?
Progto. From
Prunchow?
Jürgen Prochnow.
Prochnow. It's German, people. It's German. But yeah, the great actor from Das Boot playing like the Mr. Big of the movie. He's always in shadow. And I think the biggest problem that I have with it is just the orange filters. I mean, this movie is oversaturated with orange filters and neon lights.
Okay. I understand what you're saying, but you have to remember, as we praise him, this was kind of Tony Scott's style. And I also feel like with this film, this is where Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer started getting the look and style of their films, even though they were only producers. But they seem to follow this formula through many other films that they made.
And then the other problem is they're just rehashing the plot of the same movie. It's another close friend who, in this case, gets injured. He goes back to Beverly Hills. And mind you, they had other plots in mind to put Axel Foley in London or Paris to keep the fish out of water premise fresh. But instead, you know, the whole thing with the mansion is just a variation of the Royal Palm Hotel joke, and going to the Playboy Mansion. It's like, let's have Axel Foley bullshit every 5 minutes just to get a joke in.
It's good for what it is. I hate to say it. I respect the original Beverly Hills Cop for what it is, but I find this one slightly a bit more enjoyable only because it doesn't try to lie about what it is. It's an action movie through and through. It's not trying to say, oh, there's a deeper story here. It's just like, look, you want to see people get shot up, you want to see some naked women, you want to see some titties, then this is what you're going to get. And you're going to get Eddie Murphy with the smile and, you know, a few jokes. But, you know, stay in Eddie Murphy's hands, you'll be good company. Which unfortunately did not work out for the next film, because this film was a hit, and for years there was rumored to be another Beverly Hills Cop movie. Again, you didn't have Simpson and Bruckheimer producing this one at all. You also did not have John Ashton chose not to return. And including into all of this, Eddie had director approval, and he chose John Landis, who is a good director, but is more known for comedy than action. Other than the first scene, which I'll admit is a little inventive with him chasing the bad guys in the car, falling apart the whole time, you know, I thought that was inventive. But other than that, John Landis, or I don't know if it was Eddie Murphy or John Landis decided it, but it seems like Eddie Murphy here is more playing a superhero.
It has very low redeeming value, I will admit to that, but it was also a very troubled production. This is a film that basically was delayed for years. There were numerous scripts that were written that Eddie just could not approve of, and they were too expensive to produce because his box office track record was dropping at that time. So when they came up with the amusement park premise, which was Steven D'Souza, the writer of Die Hard, they basically were going to make it a very action-packed film. Taggart was originally supposed to come back. He was supposed to be the actual park manager of Wonder World. He was going to retire from the force, be the park manager. Murder happens, you know, from a random staff member who exposed some secrets inside the park. It was a very elaborate setup. It read like Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, but unfortunately, it was just getting delayed because the budget kept going up. They had to keep cutting it down so Eddie Murphy could get $15 million, which was a very high-paying salary for any actor at that time. So as these delays went on, and eventually when they did get the movie made, John Astin was not available. He went off and did that movie, Little Big League. And basically,
movie.
Without Taggart, you had that missing part of the Musketeers. So you go and they decide, okay, let's create a Taggart clone, and we'll create this guy.
Hector Elizondo.
Yeah, Hector Elizondo, great actor. I mean, I love him in American Gigolo, but let's face it, he's just a pale version of Taggart, and he doesn't work here. He just looks tired and just collecting a paycheck.
Now they give him a love interest in this film too, which doesn't really work for the film.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's because he seems like super agent Axel Foley, and it just seemed like this was a production where they were saying, let's just keep throwing money at it and hopefully it'll get better. And now through all this, we now have talks, or no, they've actually filmed the pilot that there's going to be a Beverly Hills Cop TV series, finally, which Eddie Murphy has always wanted, apparently, starring Brandon Jackson from Tropic Thunder. And I guess Eddie Murphy's going to produce and cameo as Axel Foley, but this is the tales of Axel Foley Jr.
I do not look forward to this TV show whatsoever. First off, it's going to be on network TV, so you know the cursing is going to be downplayed completely. And Since when did Axel Foley have a son?
And that will just about do it for this episode, but unfortunately I have just learned some sad news. Roger Ebert has unfortunately again passed away. And so I'm sure the whole cast and crew here would like to send a heartfelt dedication out to Mr. Roger Ebert. He was a great critic, a great man, and he definitely will be missed. Two thumbs up from each of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, here too. I'll even take my hat off for him and his memory. And, you know, my hearts and wishes are with his family at this time. And I'm going to actually end this episode right there. I'm not even going to send out a recommendation. I know he saw Scott Pilgrim and loved it. And that is this week's edition of Unfinished Business.